next co-host is Dr. Gregory Lunsford, a world-renowned board-certified physician, dually trained in internal medicine and psychiatry. With over 2 decades of experience, he is the founder of Atlanta Internal Medicine and Psychiatric Care, AIMPC, specializing in psychiatric services and preventative strategies. Known as Dr. G from Bravo's Married to Medicine, he is dedicated to tackling the stigma and misunderstanding of mental health. He will be the moderator for our next discussion. So please welcome me in joining Dr. Gregory Lunsford joining us on stage. Let's give him a round of applause as he comes to the microphone.
How about that? There we go. Well, I got to say, it's my distinct pleasure to be here talking about my passion, which is typically referred to by me as my ministry, and that's mental health care. Mental health care is the most important aspect of your well-being, if you ask me. And so today we're going to touch on some very, very important topics. We're going to talk about navigating grief, loss, and mental wellness in 2025 and beyond. It's the and beyond part that really gets me excited. I'm very excited to introduce our panel. The first panelist is Dr. Joanne Patterson. She is a psychiatric nurse practitioner and nurse entrepreneur, and she is very innovative in her approach to treating psychiatry and mental health issues. She went out and she established her own mobile clinic. She has an actual house that she takes place to place to administer mental health care to those in need. So I say, our second panelist, equally amazing, Monet Farr-Cole. She is the founder of New Paradigms, Grief Recovery and Life Coaching. Monet is a life transitions coach and certified grief specialist. She specializes in the area that she is very familiar with. She uses her own profound losses and life struggles to motivate others, and she has been an inspiration. I will be the moderator for this session. I'm very excited about it. Let's go. Everyone in here has dealt with grief or loss. And so it's something that not only has an emotional effect, but can also have a physical effect. And it's a trickle-down situation where, it can affect families, it can affect extended loved ones. And so let's talk about it.
Yeah. So grief is, something that almost everyone will deal with in their lives, regardless of, what's transpiring. But, in terms of what you feel about grief, it would be more like your physical symptoms we would have to really be mindful of, right? So sometimes we don't recognize that we're going through grief. So if you've lost a loved one, if you're going through a divorce, there are stages to grief. And so I always tell my patients that with grief, you need to look out for those symptoms. So sometimes it's depression, sometimes it's not getting out of bed, sometimes it is irritability, anger, things like that. And you have to be mindful of what those feel and what they look like. And I also tell patients that there is not a timetable on going through the grieving process. So a lot of times our folks will say, girl, this has been going on for a while, you should be able to just kind of bounce back. And that's not always the case. And so I always tell my patients that you have to give yourself that time. Now, there is such a thing as extended grief, extended bereavement, where we then have to do something about it. But I always tell patients that grief is something that you, only you can walk through it on your own timetable.
Yeah, and there are over 40 things that we might grieve in a lifetime. So a lot of times we don't necessarily connect grief to some of these experiences, like empty nesting, for example, or loss of a job, health challenges that we experience. So it's important to be in touch with your body during those times of grief. And some of the things could be headaches, it could be body aches, it could be, loss of appetite. It could be increased appetite. So just noticing those differences in your body is important, and self-care is just everything as well. If you know you're going through a hard time, make sure you're hydrating. Make sure, yes, we're going to go for those comfort foods, right? Because, in a hard time, we do go for the comfort foods, which is understandable. But we also want to make sure that we're eating some healthy things as well to actually nourish our body through this difficult time. And then also making sure we get some rest, because a lot of times it is hard to sleep when we have a lot on our minds and on our hearts. So try to get in, even if it's just a nap here. Naps are amazing, actually. They make a big difference. You wouldn't, you don't really realize just how much a 15-minute power nap can actually make in your body. So pay attention to those things and practice self-care.
Monet, I'm so glad you said that, because a lot of times we associate grief with someone passing away, but grief can happen with almost anything. I remember it was last year, a friend of mine, he asked me to help him with this health seminar he was having at his job. And so it was a panel of us, and we're up there on stage, I'm trying to be happy, trying to crack all these jokes and, trying to get people to hear about little things in mental health, right? And so then the question was posed to me, do you ever feel like you have no one to talk to? And I was like, hell yeah, sometimes I do feel like I have no one to talk to. And I opened up and I talked about having to walk away from this job that I had and how hurt I was. And then after that, the whole thing opened up. And people started talking, and black men started talking about their feelings. Something that black men typically don't do. But when it comes to an issue that's important to us, we open up. And so what they told me was the Friday before that meeting, there was a massive layoff at that company. Wow. And so, these guys were in grief about perhaps their job was going to be up next, or their friends who aren't working anymore, have issues with this. And so it was a grief. I went through phases with it. And so, like Joanne was saying, Dr. Joanne, that there are phases with grief, and the more we are in touch with our feelings, the more we can work it through. But oftentimes, black men, we kind of keep our feelings inside, and then the grief leaks out elsewhere. And thank God we have strong women in our lives. At least I hope we all have a strong woman in our lives.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they know we're not on point. They know that we're not our normal selves, and they help us out. And that's very important.
Yeah.
Helping someone through a grief.
Yeah, and also too, men and women, our grieving process is a little, sometimes it's different. The way that a man would express the grief or the depression or any of that sometimes looks a little bit different. So you always have to be almost in tune to your man. You have to be in tune to your sons and, some of the things that they're going through. Sometimes they're really silent about what they're experiencing. Sometimes it comes out in anger, or sometimes they just check out. And you're wondering if it's something you did, but it's really not. So being very understanding, warm, and patient with them is important as well.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because really we all grieve differently, and we all grieve different losses differently. So I grieved my mom's death differently than I grieved my father's death. So, just realize that there is no good good way to do grief. You just have to be open to your own process. Know that, and don't compare, right? Again, two siblings can lose a mom and have, and have very different experiences because our relationships are different. Every single relationship we have is different, and so you're gonna grieve it differently. So have grace with yourself and give yourself the space to grieve however you need to grieve. Because we have, a way of saying, well, you need to go through these stages, and it's not linear. Grief is not a linear process. It's really more like waves that ebb and flow, right? You have your good days, you have your bad days, and so have some room for your own grief and never ever compare. And don't analyze or judge yourself either. Just let yourself be who you are and feel what you're feeling. And also do a check-in, like, what am I feeling today? I think it's important that we get comfortable with all the different emotions that we experience. Even if we're faithful people, we believe in God, we're faithful, right? But we can still be sad and angry. We can feel all of the emotions. There's nothing wrong with the emotions. The emotions are not bad. It's what we do about them, right? So we can take intentional action, but we can feel what we feel.
I'm going to pose a question to my panelists. What are some things that you would say to someone dealing with prolonged grief that is just lingering?
Well, okay, so what I found is that I could help my clients process the grief, right? But if they didn't really get complete on all of those emotions, they found themselves kind of stuck. And so that's why I came up with the coaching program that I have to help them now, okay, let's move forward. Because if you don't process all of your emotions, they get stuck. And so that's why it's so important to do those check-ins with yourself. And whether you need a girlfriend, a husband, a wife, whatever it is, someone to talk to, a professional sometimes, to be able to talk through those emotions and actually process the grief so that you can let go of the pain. Because once we go through a significant loss in our lives, we're changed forever. We're not the same person. So it's important to process that grief, let go of the pain, and then, okay, who am I now? What's important to me now? Things weren't the same after I lost my mom. I had a different set of values that I needed to look at and decide, okay, now how do I want to go forward? But if you don't do that for yourself, you can just get stuck. And stuck just feels like life's just not moving forward. You're doing things kind of like a robot, right? You don't feel that same joy and excitement about life anymore. So that's that stuck feeling that we can absolutely get with that prolonged grief because we did not process all our emotions.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And sometimes that stuck feeling could be actually clinical depression. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have misconceptions about what clinical depression really is. What it really is a medical condition where those feel-good chemicals in your brain aren't functioning the way they should. They could perhaps be at a low level. And in that situation, a medication can be very helpful. So refer to your friendly neighborhood psychiatrist. Yes.
Yep, medications are, the first line of treatment from a clinical perspective. I always tell patients, though, 80% is lifestyle, 20% medications, because I refer to medications as a life jacket, and the therapy is learning how to swim. And so once the therapy is part of it, then, you may be able to take off the life jacket, maybe not. But I think for our community, we're a little bit on the hesitant side as it relates to medications. But once I get patients in and we talk about those chemical imbalances and they've signed on for medications, they come back and they say, I should have done this a long time ago, because of how good they're now feeling. Sometimes it doesn't mean that they have to be on medications forever, but like I said, it's a life jacket sometimes. So, yes, I agree with that. And in terms of the prolonged grief, What I usually sit down and I talk with my patients about is the things that that used to bring them joy, because the depression piece, sometimes you lose those things, like you like to do. And so we talk about, what are those things that you used to like to do? What are some of the things that you used to like to do with that person? Because, you can start, starting new traditions. So for instance, if you know that Christmas time was a great time for both of you, what about cooking their favorite dishes around Christmas? What about their birthdays? What kinds of new traditions can you incorporate so that you are memorializing, your loved one? And then just not saying that you have to move on and forget about them, but you can now have new traditions about, that person, so that you're acknowledging them and able to move on at the same time. Yeah.
Very good point. Very good point. I have another question for the panel. What do you think is the biggest misconception about grief?
Okay, so don't get mad. The 5 stages of grief, which Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is a psychiatrist that came up with it, but she developed it for terminally ill patients. But in the process, somehow it was transferred over to grievers. And so I feel like that's a misconception, that we go through this stage, and in this stage, to me, it's not linear like that. You might not experience any of those things. You might experience all of them. You might experience 1 or 2, but all of our journeys is completely unique, like I was saying earlier, because it's based on those relationships to the people and to the things in which we lost. So that's one of the biggest misconceptions about grief. Just understand that your grief is just very unique to you, and just let it be whatever it is. Don't let someone come and say, "Hey, you on that denial stage yet? Are you done with it yet? Did you go through all? If you didn't do all 5, you have not grieved properly." So don't be a victim to that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's a great point.
I'm thinking about children. Somehow that just came into my mind. The biggest misconception is that children don't grieve. And they do. It just looks different. And I don't think we take their temperature as much as we should when things are happening in their lives. They may process it a little bit different, but the misconception sometimes is that children don't necessarily go through the stages or the process of grieving. So I think we also need to be cognizant, or mindful, that they do too have feelings, and sometimes they're big feelings that we're not acknowledging. So I just want you to make sure that you pay attention to your children. For whatever it is that you're going through, they're going through it at the same time. Yeah.
Those conversations are so important, like to really have real conversations with children about what it is they're feeling. But, as their caretakers, we don't want them to feel bad. "Oh, God, don't feel bad, baby, don't cry." No, it's okay. Like, you're sad. It's okay. What you're feeling is completely normal. Let's talk about it, or not, but I'm here for you when you're ready to talk about all of those big feelings, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, oftentimes when people are grieving, we don't really know what to do for them. We feel awkward in approaching them and discussing what the issues are. And I think it's very important not to be so afraid to approach people when they're dealing with grief, and not be so focused on making them feel the way that you feel they should feel, but accepting them in the way that they actually are feeling, and helping them work through that. That brings me to my next question. What are some of the things that we can do as a community to help each other with grief?
Well, I think, the word community, I think we all need community when we're grieving. We self-isolate a lot. And not only that, as a community of color, I think we we don't acknowledge that grief is something that we can go through and that we can talk about. I think we sort of stuff it down, and then we keep pushing through, and no one's able to say, you know, we just need to have this conversation about how I'm feeling. Big feelings is not something that we do in our community, and I think that's the issue. I think we need to be more approachable and transparent about how we are feeling about things. I just had someone come to my table, and she was just very moved by what's going on, you know, politically in this country, and, you know, not knowing what to do with those feelings. So just having outlets, having little pockets, you know, it could be a potluck and just talking about how we're feeling, but we need to be able to express how we're feeling, because physiologically, then the blood pressure starts going up, the diabetes, because you're eating the bad things. You know, I have this conversation with patients all the time. Food affects your mood, and your mood affects how you feel. It's like this bad relationship that we keep, you know, engaging in. So I think that we have to acknowledge the fact that in community, we need exactly that. We need to be able to have pockets of time where we can express how we feel without being judged.
Yeah, I think that's so important, you know, just because if we can take preemptive measures, right, to start being able to have conversations, honest conversations about how we really feel about things, then when things go really bad for us, then we have an opportunity to continue that dialogue to help support each other. But the other thing we can do is, like, a lot of people show up like those first days of the loss, right? First, maybe I'll give you a couple of weeks, right? Yeah. But what's happening like 3 months in, 6 months in, a year in, right? Wanting to check in with the people that we love, check in as a community, check in to just make sure that there's nothing else, you know, just to ask, is there anything you need? Can I support you? Because we just assume you're good now. And they're probably not, but they don't want to say it, right? Because they should have gone through the 5 stages and they should have been over it by now, right? But we want to just kind of check in as a community with each other and being able, like you said, to just have those honest conversations with our sister circles or in our families, you know, to be able to.
Monet, I just love that when you said preemptive, because, you know, a lot of times when a community is affected by grief, it's when some huge tragedy has happened, you know, and then we're all struggling with it. You know, whether it be someone had an accidental death, whether it be some, you know, violent outbreak somewhere, something like that. But then what needs to happen after that, and what often happens, but not always, is that we mobilize. You know, we try to get some initiative going, you know, start an organization, start some sort of initiative to deal with that so we don't have to see it again. And so as a community, we have to continue to double down on that and improve as a community and get rid of some of these ills that keep plaguing us, you know? So I love that. Another question. What do you think about spirituality in terms of dealing with grief?
So, you know, we can have faith. And I kind of said it earlier, we can have faith, but still have other emotions. You know, we don't always have to be this resilient. Yes, I understand, you know, because we go into the intellectualizing, he's in a better place. You know, it was for the best. You know, we intellectualize it. But grief is heart work. It's not mind work. So we want to go back to the heart. And we want to be able to, you know, talk about it from there. And you can still have your faith. And to be honest, a lot of times our faith wavers a little when really bad things happen. And that's okay too. It's okay to question. But it's you then decide what's your spiritual journey. And go to those practices though, right? Because that's part of your self-care as well. If you are a spiritual person, then there are things that you've done in the past, and maybe you might take a break because you're mad. You know, I've had some real conversations with God, like, I'm not really feeling you right now, God, like, you know, help me out. And, you know, but then I come back to it, right? So whether it's, you know, praying, going to church, being in community, you know, meditating, you know, whatever it is, I think those things are still important, but it's okay to feel the breath of your emotions, even in faith.
Okay, so we've talked quite a bit about grief, loss, And the third part of this conversation is mental wellness in 2025 and beyond. What does that look like to you?
Mental wellness in 2025, I think with everything that's going on, we have to really think about what social media is also doing to our mental health. I'm going to be honest with you. After those 2 planes went down, I started doom scrolling and realized that I was not sleeping at night, and slowly said to myself, "Self, you're going to have to dial down the social media for a little bit." So mental wellness also will be in 2025, and I just think and beyond, is we have to be very intentional with how much time we spend with some of these things that are going on in our world today. Because it can consume you. I was very consumed because I thought I could have been on that plane. You know, like it really did something to me. And even though we're mental health professionals, we're human. And so for me to recognize that, and then hearing it from my patients as well, and I've had to tell them, you're going to have to cut down on the social media and the news, because, you know, what we see in the news, rarely do we see good things, you know, happening. Sometimes it's just a lot, what sells, whatever sells, it's doom scrolling, right? So I think we need to be really intentional about that. Moving forward in 2025. And then incorporating things like dance therapy. That's what I do. When I've had a tough day, I'm going to Zumba. You know, I'm doing something to get my serotonin levels and my endorphins up. So you have to try to incorporate fun, you know, doing some fun things, as well as acknowledging what's happening in your lives.
For me, I think, you know, mental wellness, you know, like I said, is, you know, being honest about where we are when we feel the bad things, we feel the bad things, but also embracing joy, right? Also, you know, finding those things, like you said, that really are deposits into you. I look at my life sometimes like a bucket. I need to make some deposits. And my daughter, she came up with the best thing ever. She has a jar that's solo dates. And so she wrote all these cool things that she can do that really feed her. So just finding joy and being intentional about moving forward. But it also means also being intentional about our wealth, because our wellness, because I'm tired of this resilience thing, right? We're resilient. Well, you know, sometimes we need to be okay with not being so resilient and just really figuring out where we are right now in this moment and just dealing with the truth of, you know, what we're feeling, but also then taking those intentional steps to move yourself forward in a life that you love.
All right. So with this segment of the program, we'd like to open it up for questions. Anybody have any questions?
Oh, hello. Oh, okay.
I see this young lady right here.
Okay, I'll take advantage of the situation. My mother's passed, but prior to her passing, she was healthy. She had a stroke. 2 weeks later, she was gone. What was challenging for me was when I was visiting her in the hospital, I had to deal with the grief of the mother that I knew was gone, okay, as well as visit her every day and console with her every day. And I did not know who to turn to in regards to that, because when you think about grief, well, Laurie, she's not dead. Okay, no, she was not dead, but to me, the mother that I knew had passed. So can you give us some advice on how to deal with those type situations?
I would like to take that because I've been there. So my mom was in hospice, and so I've been her cheerleader, right, through the whole cancer treatments and remission and everything. And all of a sudden, there was no cheerleading to be done. And I went radio silent. Instead of being able to have like the honest conversations with my mom, like just making space for her to talk about how she felt in that moment. Because you're right, I was grieving. You're already grieving the person before they die. you know, and then you grieve them once they're dead. So we're just not at our best, right? So first of all, give yourself grace because you weren't your best self in that moment. So we are going to falter, we're going to trip during those times. But what's important is to know that we can make space for honest conversation with a person when they're in that transition. They might not want to talk about it, but they might. Just make the space to have some honest conversation. And if they're open, you can have that. And, you know, maybe find some peace in that.
Yes, so this is more of a statement. I want to take time to affirm you all as mental health professionals and being Black from one to another. I'm a therapist, and there are nowhere near enough of us in the field because it's so much that's happening to us as a people. And at the foundation of a lot of these issues here, health-wise, is your mental and emotional wellness. So most of us don't even realize how our mental and emotional selves impact our behavior, which impacts our physical health. So like being able to have these types of conversations and access allows us for more awareness of how we treat ourselves, which will impact how we kind of grow and move forward, right, as a people. So I thank y'all for the work that y'all are doing. Dr. Patterson, we had a really good conversation upstairs earlier, and I'm really grateful for what you do. Honestly and truthfully, when I see my own clients and I work with them, they ask questions about education. I'm a social worker by licensure, LCSW, and many people don't even know that if you have questions around your care, you go talk to the social worker in the hospital because we have the resources. Like, that's literally our job, to kind of educate y'all on the resource. So you ask the questions, you talk to your therapist, you have a conversation about how you're feeling so that way you know what to do next, as opposed to feeling lost and then getting stuck and then things are kind of cycling on ourselves and not realizing you're in a trauma cycle, right? And then the second thing is, as Black people in America today, we are walking around as inherently traumatized due to our history. So we're always going to be predispositioned to like more things regardless of what we do because we're already so emotionally raw and we were born from it, just being here as a people. So it's important to take care of your emotional wellness and have conversations even if you don't know what to do. I tell all my clients the first step to wellness is curiosity, so just ask questions and then everything else will open up in time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. We need more of you.
One
Next
more.
question.
Awesome.
So my question is in relation to, you talked about medication being an option for some things, but for those who don't want to pursue medication, let's say for something like anxiety, can you talk about how to manage that through other means?
Yes, I get this all the time. You know, people have such an aversion to taking medication. And I just like to say, when people get a good response from an antidepressant, what they come in and they tell me is, I just feel like my normal self. I can't explain it. I just feel better. I feel like, you know, when I get stressed, but after a while, I just shake it off. I keep moving. I'm sleeping better. My energy level is back. So it's not like they come in and saying, well, I'm happy all the time. Life's perfect. That's not realistic. So if you can embrace the fact that clinical depression is a real medical issue, then you won't have such an aversion to medications.
I was thinking about, you know, I know that there's some people who prefer a holistic approach to their mental health, which I'll say this, I have seen some things work, but if their depression and anxiety is moderate to severe, those supplements are not going to help. So herbal medicines, you know, St. John's wort and GABA, all of those things are helpful, but medications will more than likely trump those holistic approaches if your anxiety and depression are in a severe or moderate category. So minimal depression and anxiety, perhaps you can try those things, but medications probably will give you the effect that you're looking for.
Okay, so this is a guide. I'm sorry, guys. I work with mainly women, but you know, you can get some good out of it too. This is a guide from not just surviving, but thriving for Black women. It's a free guide. If you want, you can download it by using the QR code. And it just has some helpful information about, you know, taking your life not from just the basics, the minimum basics, but, you know, elevating our lives.